Everyone, and welcome to JADAK's RFID for Medical Applications webinar. I'm Mark Waterman, Director of Design at JADAK, and with me today is Rob Geiger.
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, let me introduce Rob to everyone. He's a senior systems engineer at JADAK, an application engineer. He has over 30 years of experience in technology development and management, over 10 years experience at JADAK in auto ID for the medical industry, including barcode, machine vision, and of course RFID. Rob has over 12 years experience in medical device development and program management, and education includes a master's in physics and a BS in physics and mathematics. And with that, I will turn this over to Rob. Thank you, Rob.
All right, thank you, Mark. So what we want to talk, what we want to talk about today is RFID and how it's used in medical applications to solve problems that range from, for instance, asset sample or patient tracking, verification of assets for both appropriateness for the application and that it is within spec for sterilization, expiration, etc. Also, as verification for correct sample handling in the case of cold chain custody or large sample volumes. So just a real quick review of the agenda: device verification and selection, medical asset tracking, automation for large specimen volumes, reduction of hospital-acquired infections, and cold chain custody. So what we're going to do is really go through some examples of all of this. But first, I want to talk a little bit about JADAK as a company. JADAK is a business unit of Novanta. JADAK started in 2000, ultimately to provide auto ID solutions for medical suppliers. We were a privately held company until we were purchased in 2014 by Novanta. And Novanta is really a holding company with several medical component suppliers under their wing. And auto ID solutions for device manufacturers, including RFID, machine vision, barcode, printing, chart recorders for ECGs, etc., as well as color and light measurement. 90% of our customers are medical and biopharmaceutical manufacturers and point-of-care providers. So because of this, we understand what's important to these manufacturers and provide lock configurations on every part we delivered. Also, as part of that, we are an ISO 9001 and 13485 company. This slide shows a variety of healthcare applications where our RFID might be used. You have, for instance, laboratory, clinical chemistry and diagnostics machines, pharmacy, medication management, inventory control, diagnostics, point-of-care devices, which include ultrasound, vital signs monitors, infusion pumps, patient and caregiver verification, as well as consumable tracking. In the operating room, device verification, system setup, sterilization verification, component tracking, making sure the vital assets don't, quote-unquote, walk out of the operating room, and also that they are appropriate for the surgery at hand. So let's get to the agenda. So now let's get into the meat of the discussion and kind of the point of the presentation today. We want to discuss examples of RFID in medical applications. So let's start off with device verification and selection. Here are a few examples of how RFID can be used to verify that components being used are not counterfeit, are correct for the machines that they're being plugged into, are used properly, and even in some cases help set up the machine. So this first example deals with an electrosurgical scalpel. Originally, this is a company we had worked with for a while. So originally, the system just used imaging to identify which electrosurgical scalpel was being used and inserted into the machine. but now it uses a combination of imaging and RFID. JADAK was able to design the entire identification system for the customer. The customer needed verification for components used in this electrosurgery. Once the device was inserted and confirmed, this triggered setup of several system parameters based on which of the surgical scalpels were plugged in. Also wanted to store more data than they originally had that identified the scalpel. So not only scalpel type, but also calibration data for the specific unit. So during a refresh, they wanted to use RFID on new inserts, but still had a large population of barcoded devices out in the field. So what we did as a company, we used our JADAK Vibe camera, which you see, it's actually in the housing that you'll see on the screen. We use this camera in conjunction with the RFID reader so that the device could use both RFID-enabled plugs as well as the legacy barcoded plugs. Also, something to note, because of the high voltages used in this environment is very noisy, so we used an RS-422 interface. So this is kind of an example of JADAK analyzing the problem and taking a reference platform that we had and modifying it to fit the customer's application. Next, this is a surgical needle guidance example. So this is a case of consumable tracking. An RFID tag was adhered to the outside of the consumable packaging. This contained lot number, manufacturer number, which was the location of manufacturer, expiration date, and also calibration data. Process was to read an RFID tag placed on the outside of the plastic tray which housed the needle used in the procedure in conjunction with an ultrasound device. So basically the ultrasound device was used for the guidance of insertion of the needle. So tag information was used both to calibrate the ultrasound device and also to prevent reuse of the same needle. This particular example used a Gemini module which writes a date stamp to the tag so that it can be can be rendered inactive after a configurable period of time. Ultimately, the purpose of the RFID was to prevent reuse and counterfeiting. In this case, a password protection scheme for the RFID tag was used to prevent unauthorized reading and writing of information to the tag. Custom firmware was provided to ensure encryption password capability on the tag. So once again, this kind of highlights how we can take a standard JADAK platform and modify it for a customer need. Just one more note, the Gemini is an HF reader. It's actually an NFC reader, near field communication. Surgical pump example. During, just to kind of discuss the process of how we work with our customers, during the discussion with the customer, we explored both RFID and barcoding for the application, but ultimately the customer chose RFID due to its ability to write to tags and modify them. Then they were also able to invalidate the tags once the tube sets used in this process had been used. There are, in this device, there's 2 ports with 2 catheters, and due to space constraints, the customer wanted to use 1 interrogator or 1 RFID reader with small antennas at each port. JADAK created a 2-antenna solution that was multiplexed into 1 interrogator unit. So in this particular example, this was a grounds-up development specific for this device. This device was used in joint replacement surgery. So one line irrigated the area and the second evacuated the area. The tube sets were designed as single use and ultimately are a revenue stream for the company. And they noticed that the tube sets were being cloned or copied in one area of the world, and in another they were being sterilized and reused. And ultimately this was cutting into the profits for the consumables. embedded the RFID tags in the plastic tubes, and the JADAK readers were able to, in this particular case, JADAK actually allowed the company to create their own encryption scheme to read and write from the tags. So it was very specific to this one device. After one use, a secure block was written and encrypted data, with encrypted data to signify that the device had been used. And one more note on this example, JADAK designed the unit to work with the available power and interfaces that were on the device. So in this case, it was an RS-485 example and operated on 24 volts, where many of the units operate at 5-volt levels, either TTL or USB. So a little different interface for this guy. So that basically wraps it up for verification and selection. Now let's look at tracking of samples. So we'll go into a few examples of tracking people, assets, devices used in procedures, as well as pharmaceuticals. So this is a specific example that is the ZCAN smart rooms and systems. So this highlights patient tracking that ultimately results in more efficient processes and is ultimately better for the patient. This particular example was an oncology lab for radiation therapy. The hospital needed to reduce manual tracking of patients via the old hospital chart system. So as part of this, they wanted to improve patient wait times as well. So automatic real-time tracking of patients' locations can ultimately improve efficiency and therefore patient satisfaction and just make it better for the patient. So a staff member is there to greet and sign in and queue the patients. At the time the patient receives, at this particular time, the patient receives an RFID-enabled wristband. The treatment rooms can then track the entire treatment process, including treatment accessories needed for the specific treatment, so it improves both treatment workflow and patient safety. Patient tracking whiteboards were used for real-time updates for both patients and for those in the waiting room. You know, we've been talking a little bit about RFID, and I do want to take a little step back here to give a little on RFID and some of the systems. This particular system is uses UHF, ultra high frequency. The previous two examples were HF, or high frequency examples. So for some background, HF operates at 13.56 megahertz and is more of a near field with max distances of 15 centimeters, typically used at much closer distances on the order of 1 to 2 centimeters. This uses a magnetic coupling. UHF, on the other hand, operates in bands between 860 megahertz and 960 megahertz and as an E field. Terms you'll hear in the RFID world for HF systems, the tags are either ISO 15693 tags as a standard. That's for the standard high frequency. And then near field communication, or NFC, tags are ISO 14443, but they both operate at 13.56 megahertz. HF tags originally started with Class 2 Gen 2 tags. Now, ultimately, they're up to Gen 2 V2 is the term you'll commonly hear for UHF tags. And these are ISO 18000-63. And then RED certification has become important this year. As of June of 2017, the European Union declared that all devices that are sold in the EU needed a RED certification, which is a radiated emission directive. And I do want to state that all the devices that we are talking about here today are RED certified and ready for sale in the EU. And environmental controls. This case is similar to the last. with some pretty nice twists on how RFID can be used. This system was implemented at the Disney Family Cancer Center in Burbank, California. All the patients get an RFID-enabled all of the patients get RFID-enabled devices or lanyards that are read by two ThingMagic Astra readers at doorways in this system. ThingMagic's Astra is an all-in-one RFID and antenna unit. And also one note about ThingMagic, JADAK has historically, from the get-go, designed custom-made RFID interrogators and system for devices. But over the last few years, we've acquired a couple companies, SkyTech in Denver, Colorado, which specializes in HF readers, and also ThingMagic in Bedford, Massachusetts, which specializes in UHF readers. So they have many components that we can use as is, or actually use those as reference designs to make specialized units for applications. Getting back to this example, except for the ID number on these tags, these were otherwise unmarked tags that that were on lanyards around the patient's necks. So they served as links for billing, pharmaceuticals, scheduling, and also doctor information. So in addition, the tag also held patient atmosphere preferences that included 6 music choices, 3 color choices, and various nature scenes, and specific desired temperatures, so that specific rooms could be set up for specific patients, and it just made the experience a little bit nicer. Identified by the reader, a member of the staff is immediately able to get to the patient, greet them, and direct them to their next appointment. This particular case, the full case study is under the resources case study section of the JADAK website. So if you want additional information, I will guide you to that. The other thing to note about some of these examples are that we do work with partners for integration in some of these sites. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So pharmaceutical control for supply cabinets, as well as tracking. So this is obviously an example of tracking for a pharmacy. This customer needed to track medications going into and out of a hospital pharmacy, not only for inventory, stocking, and reorder purposes, but also to monitor expiration dates on medications. UHF technology was used to read all incoming medications, and once prescriptions were filled, a secondary tag on a distribution bag provided tracking for the sample ultimately to the patient. So this provided more efficient and timely stocking of medications, but also verification of how and who the medications were used for, as well as tracking and verification of expiration dates. Loss prevention portholes and using choke points to loss. This is an example of obviously loss prevention. The site wanted to eliminate loss of high-value items that were used in the operating room. This solution had to read a variety of tagged items and trigger event-specific notifications so that people could act on systems and devices that were leaving the OR. So it wasn't uncommon for expensive surgical instruments, such as probes and other equipment, to be lost or misplaced from the OR. So one example, oddly enough, of loss was that surgical supplies were getting mixed in with the linens at the end of operations. In this particular case, was to use a heavy-duty RFID portal for the OR linen cart exit to the laundry and also at the main entrance of the OR. This used ThingMagic UHF readers and antennas. The ROI was actually achieved within a year simply from loss prevention and improved productivity. An RFID tracking system increased the availability and optimization of critical systems and equipment, improved staff efficiencies. And once again, this full case study, if you want to read more about it, is on the resource case study section of the JADAK website. So what you see pictured here is actually the JADAK hand scanner. This is our HS1R. So it's a barcode scanner and RFID reader in one. In this example, a patient monitor company wanted the ability to track where devices were used and who was using it, and ultimately on who it was being used. Locations, bed and room IDs can either be barcoded or an RFID label. These can be the same, but lean more toward barcodes at this time. Clinician ID badges lean more toward RFID, but they can also be barcoded. In this case, the combination of both RFID and barcoding reading in one package allowed the use of either type of device and allow the system to satisfy the 5 patient rights, ultimately the right patient, the right drug, used at the right time, in the right dose, and the right route. And verified who administered the drug. Look at some examples of verification and tracking for large specimen volumes. This is typically associated with large clinical chemistry devices and diagnostics machines. In this case, this was a high volume automated pharmacy. Individual canisters in this case were used for transport of medication. These had RFID tags that were written to when the canister was automatically filled. In this case, had multiple antennas to write to the tags for tracking. There were multiple carousels, each having an RFID interrogator. So all of these various antennas were ultimately multiplexed to a single RFID and interrogator. The readers were then ultimately daisy-chained back to the host so that one port could control multiple readers, and then these individual readers were multiplexed to multiple antennas. So you can see in this application that via one port, you could control quite a few of these canisters, read and write to them. So it really minimizes the amount of need for an RFID application and really expands the ability to read and write to individual tags. So barcode and RFID in a clinical analysis device. So as I'd mentioned, this uses both barcode and RFID. This is for a large clinical chemistry device. Racks in this particular case with multiple samples were inserted into the device. All of the sample vials were barcoded with a unique identifier that linked that sample to specific patients. So as the racks were inserted into the device, a barcode reader would read and report the barcode and position information of the sample to the host. Once fully inserted, an RFID interrogator was able to write the IDs and positions data into an RFID tag that was on the rack. Once inserted, once the racks were in the device, they were robotically transported to several analysis stations where sample vials could undergo separate tests unique to each vial. So really expanding the capabilities here. At the various stations, these unique actions and tests that were conducted on the individual samples within the racks could then be updated to the tag. And the unique processes of, in this case, 8 samples could be tracked via RFID data that was actually on the rack. Let's, excuse me. Now let's look at RFID, how it can be used to reduce hospital-acquired infections. In this case, in some of these cases, RFID can be used to verify devices are properly sterilized or that staff are using proper protocol for sterilization before contact with patients. So this is an IV sterilization unit. This particular device is used for catheter tip sterilization. The sterilization device needs to, in this case, read both barcodes and RFID information of the off the patient wristband, and also the caregiver ID, and then store this information onto the device for tracking history. This was an all-in-one unit, actually kind of a nice little unit there. The previous method for catheter tip sterilization was to wipe the tip down with alcohol, but reports of site infection due to improperly sterilized tips have been reported. This unit uses UV light to sterilize the catheter tips at the patient bedside and confirm sterilization, the time it was sterilized, and also the caregiver that did the sterilization. Using either barcode reader or the RFID reader, this allowed identification of who was giving the sterilization. So the the catheter tip was inserted into the device for sterilization. Time you could both timestamp the process and, like I say, verify who the catheter tip was being used for and who did the sterilization. This particular device started off by using our HS2 wireless Bluetooth scanner. So it just kind of gives you another idea of how we take some of our standard platforms and modify them for unique applications. Of hospital-acquired infections at the point of care. The hospital needed to verify the compliance of hand sterilization of its staff. In order to verify the use of hand sanitizer stations, these stations were equipped with RFID readers that could read the staff ID badge. The site had, as part of its standard operating procedure, mandated that employees use the hand sanitizer stations before contact with patients. The use of RFID badges allowed for tracking of the staff at the sanitizing stations. So you might ask, did this ultimately verify use? No, it didn't, but the site found that if the staff knew they were being tracked and had to be in the vicinity of the station, that they were much more likely to use it. Another example of hand washing verification for food services. This is not a medical application, but it's a similar kind of concept. And this was for food preparation industry with automatic hand washers. An RFID portal or gate system verified that workers entered the room where the hand washers were located. It verified when they were in the proximity of the hand washer and also that the hand washer had been activated. And then lastly, it verified when the workers walked back through the portal to verify that they had entered the room, used the hand washing station, and ultimately left. Okay, let's talk a little bit about cold chain custody and how RFID can be used, making sure that samples either stay in a cold environment when they come out of that environment, and in some cases actually verify that temperatures were not exceeded or even give a temperature profile. So this concept has been used in some specialized cases. Companies such as RF Micron make wireless passive tags for temperature and moisture. The temperature ranges for these tags typically go from about -40°C to 85. So they would be good for food storage, refrigerated vaccine storage, pharmaceutical storage and verification. RFID tags have the ability to give feedback on temperature, humidity, pressure, etc. when they are read. There are also battery-assisted data logger tags that can store information of the entire temperature profile, but like I say, in order to get that profile, they need to be active and have a battery. The passive tags, on the other hand, give feedback and will give indication, like I say, of environment, temperature, pressure, moisture at the time they are powered up and read by the interrogator. Simply for the purpose of tagging and verifying samples at liquid nitrogen temperatures, there are a few examples. Most tags, like I say, are only spec'd to -40°C, but there are examples of hardened tags that can be exposed to liquid nitrogen temperatures. HID Global is very active in RFID, has worked with a company called CryoGat, and they've worked together to create an HF tag system that can survive at liquid nitrogen temperatures. Also, at Wake Forest Baptist Health, they have a program using UHF tags at liquid nitrogen temperatures. So ultimately, just because the tag is not specified for that temperature doesn't necessarily mean it won't work, but in doing that, you do have to understand the risks. Pretty much wraps up the examples that I had today. But I do want to say that we as a company, JADAK, we have the ability to do hardware, software, mechanical engineering to design exactly what you need. We can offer or recommend peripheral elements that support readers, such as antennas and multiplexers, displays, etc. We can help you select tags and support advanced tag features such as cryptographic security for both HF and UHF tags, also support for UHF RFID sensor tags. Many of the tag manufacturers also make interrogators or readers, so they are typically only work with their tags. But we as a company are what we call tagnostics. We will work with anybody's tags. And ultimately, we like to say we would provide exceptional customer service during and after development. Our goal is to have JADAK engineering team be as accessible and responsive as the customer's own engineering team, and sometimes, hopefully, even more so. So with that being said, are there any questions?
Yes, Rob, that was excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, a handful of questions have come in, and the first one is asking, in the patient tracking examples that you talked about, some hospitals are massive. Do you have readers all over the hospital?
That's actually a good point. These examples aren't like a real-time tracking system that you may have heard of, where the real-time tracking systems actually use active RFID tags and are integrated throughout the hospital. Typically, for the examples listed, we install RFID readers or gates, you might want to think about them, at specific portals where the patients might be passing through, or in some cases, the assets might be passing through, like I say, the OR or a particular wing of a hospital. So yeah, these examples typically are associated with specific sites within the hospital and are not widely distributed, just because patients that are in a hospital for a specific surgery or condition tend to stay in one part of the hospital.
Okay. Next question is, for some of the cases of RFID with catheters, how are the tags adhered to the sets?
And that's a good point. In some of the in some of the examples, the tags are actually embedded or molded into the plastics of the catheter sets. It's not all tags can do this just because of the heat of the molding process. But there are tags, and if that's what you need, we can definitely point you to manufacturers of tags that can handle the temperatures associated with that. The other method is that some of the applications require multiple catheter or tube sets in a package. So in those cases, the package themselves are tagged, and it's just with there are specific adhesives that are used for this. But the key here is that, or the logic associated with that, is that if you have to open the bag or the set, you're going to use every item in that set, and individual items aren't going to be reused, for instance. Or if one individual item was reused, it just wouldn't make sense from a counterfeit standpoint to just do one when you had to open a bag that might say, for instance, have 4 catheters or devices in it.
Okay, great. Here's another question. The question is in regards to the special regulation for the IEC 6601 to use the NF technology. Is there a special regulation for the IEC 6601 to use the near-field technology?
No, not associated with that, because the 60601 is actually a medical directive, and anything associated with the NFC or any of the RFID interrogators are going to be more associated with radio frequency directives, whether it's the RED directive in Europe or FCC regulations in the U.S. or various other countries' regulatory agencies.
Okay. Follow-up with that also was, for a disposable, the crypto must be very strong. How can you assure that that works?
In some cases, for security, the encryption is basically a handshaking between the tag and the interrogator and the host system. So there's a variety of methods we employ, either tag to host encryption with hashtags. The other way to use that is some of the tags themselves, specifically NFC tags, have encryption capability built right into the tag. Some people don't like to use that because they feel that sniffers can be used. So we do have pass-through methods where encrypted data and ultimately encrypted hashtags on the tag can be used for totally encrypted handshaking.
All right. Another question is, aside from read distance, why would you select UHF over HF or vice versa?
Read distance is a big discriminator between the two technologies. One of the reasons you might use HF is for discrimination. And by that, I mean if you need to be basically a couple centimeters away from a device that you are reading, you pretty much know exactly what tag you are reading and therefore which device you are reading. The other thing about HF tags is the data content capacity is larger than an UHF tag. HF tags can be on the order of 8 kilobytes, where a UHF tag is typically on the order of 8 kilobits. That's a key distinguisher there. UHF tags are typically on the order of tens to low hundreds of bits. So there's a distinction in data content available. Read speed is going to be much faster with UHF, and many UHF applications are used for inventory control and management, stocking verification, for instance. Those are cases where you're going to read potentially hundreds of items in a room or a drawer at a time. And with UHF systems, typically they can do about 750 reads a second. HF systems are going to be slower, still on the order of hundreds of milliseconds. And then writes as well. Writes of a HF tag would typically take longer. And by that, you're talking hundreds of milliseconds to maybe a second or two, and that does depend on distance and signal strength.
Excellent. All right, last question. I know you addressed this a little before by one of the previous slides, but do you have both modules, RFID modules and readers? And can you talk a bit about where you would use each?
Yes. The thing about the modules, we do have both modules and full units. The thing about the modules, they're nice for integrated systems that can be embedded into a device. And ultimately, you're talking about a PCB board that can be directly coupled to the host system, the processor board or computer that might be used. So these devices, the HF devices, for instance, have onboard antennas, so that minimizes the space they're going to take up. They can also use external antennas, but many of the near-field HF applications can use simply the onboard antenna. Same for UHF devices. We do have embedded individual devices that can be embedded into a customer's system. But typically in the applications of patient tracking or portals, that's where you would use the full-up systems, the Astra readers from ThingMagic, things like that. That's nice because they have internet connections. You can do power over internet. They can be wall-mounted and read entire rooms or individual doorways or portals, just these devices. So that's more of an application for the full-up readers where you can supply power, you've got a connection to the outside world, and you've got the reader and antenna all basically together in one unit.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for the questions for now. We will be, want to thank all the attendees, and again, Rob, thank you very much. Excuse me. Want to let everybody know that we will be sending an email with notification on a recording of this webinar, and that will be emailed to everyone. And we'll be sure to include, if anyone has any additional questions, an email address in which you can send those to. And as Rob already mentioned, please visit jadaktech.com for more information on upcoming webinars. And we have a lot of resources such as white papers and case studies on RFID. Just to mention, please also consider visiting us at a couple of upcoming trade shows. RFID Journal Live in Orlando, April 10th to the 12th of next year. And, of course, the big AACC trade show in Chicago this year, which is July 29th through August 12th. All right. We want to say again, thank you, Rob, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. And if you're at all interested in scheduling a Tech Day consultation, please email us at techday@jadaktech.com. And we hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, everybody.